From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Isaacs.
Hi everyone, Lori Tucker here along with our legal analyst Greg Isaacs. It's good to have you with us today. We're talking about something that really was a bombshell for a lot of people yesterday. Could Luigi Mangione, you know that name, get the death penalty in the shooting death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson? That's the big story that everybody's talking about. Greg, the crime shook the nation last year. This United Healthcare CEO was simply walking down a Manhattan sidewalk, Midtown Manhattan, outside a hotel, getting ready to go to a convention, and he was gunned down. Let's first talk about the federal and state charges against Mangione after this happened, and bring us up to date on this case.
Well, December 4th was a day that shocked New York and the country when Luigi Mangione went to New York after stalking, planning as Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, said the assassination of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO. He had stalked his movements, knew where he was going to be, and basically in cold blood shot the CEO of United Healthcare, resulting in his death. And, the vigilanteism factor of this case was apparent from the very beginning.
This was kind of a scavenger hunt, if you will, looking at all the pieces that put this case together.
It was. And, to add to the mystery and the high-profile nature of this case, 3 bullets that were found had 3 words: delay, defend, depose, and that is the mantra that vigilantes seek to impose when they are criticizing big healthcare for not paying insurance claims.
We'll talk about that wider scope when it comes to the wider issue of the healthcare debate. Mangione, I need to point out, has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. New York doesn't have a death penalty. And so it's unusual, Greg, for federal prosecutors to pursue that in states that don't issue capital punishment for state crimes.
And let's talk about that. There are 2 parallel sets of charges. Offenses that are related to a weapon that results in death, planning, aggravated stalking as it relates to the state New York charges, parallel charges that are federal in nature. But what's much different, and you have this really a chasm of the legal juxtaposition on the 2 prosecutorial choices. New York does not have the death penalty, so that's not the option. The offenses he's charged with could result in life in prison in a supermax facility. But Pam Bondi has said, in no uncertain terms, we are seeking the death penalty.
How can that happen?
Well, how can they happen? The death penalty federally is very rare. Under the prior Trump administration, there were 22 executions. Interestingly, again, you look at the dichotomy between New York and federal prosecution, between President Trump, President Biden. One of the first acts that happened was Attorney General Merrick Garland issuing a stay of federal capital cases, death penalty cases. And what President Biden did at the end of his tenure of president was actually grant pardons and clemency to 37 of 40 individuals that were on federal death row.
President Biden kind of went back and forth on his stance on the death penalty.
He did. It's interesting. Some of the ones that he did not issue pardons to were the Boston Marathon bomber. There were 2 individuals that were upset when they were pardoned and said, no, thank you. Don't want your pardon, President Biden.
Put.
We're going to stay put. But, it's really amazing when you look at this. There are only limited exceptions, and you have to have federal jurisdiction. Typically, that's a nexus. You have to use, you have to travel in interstate commerce, which Mangione did. You have to use the internet or something that gives you that nexus for federal jurisdiction.
And his laptop is something that his attorney wants to take a look at, hasn't seen it yet.
And she does. And it's interesting because when you look at the federal requirements for death penalty, they're mirror image for states like Tennessee. The Attorney General has to file a notice of death. She has to specify what the aggravating factors are. And what she would do, the case would be tried like a state death penalty case, there would be a bifurcated trial.
So it would be in New York.
It would be in New York. So the first phase would be guilt or innocence. If there was a guilty verdict, then you would have a sentencing phase. And as long as the prosecutors prove one of their aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt, then the jury is supposed to impose a sentence of death for punishment.
Is this an open and shut case given the character, number one, and we'll talk more about Luigi Mangione and all the attention he's getting, but also just the sheer amount of evidence that was found and the notes that were found where he talked about mindset and motivation.
Well, if you look at the evidence that's been leaked and has become a public record thus far, it's clear that Mangione wanted, and this is somebody that is an Ivy League graduate. His parents have a prominent real estate development company, but he really wanted to set himself up as a vigilante. And it's interesting, the defense team thus far have kind of absorbed that type of mantra and are using it very offensively. And they're saying, instead of talking about their client is presumed innocent, their client may have mitigating circumstances, they're going after big health care.
Big health care and his health issues.
So it's interesting, they've almost thrown down the gauntlet from the very beginning that we're going after a jury nullification, which is a tough road and prohibited by most jurisdictions.
And isn't that making the victim the criminal in this case?
They are demonizing, victimizing the victim, and it'll be interesting to see how that strategy plays out. But again, they are making no bones about it. There is no equivocation. They think this case is about big health care, not about their client assassinating, as Attorney General Bondi said, Brian Thompson in cold blood.
We're going to talk more about Bondi, maybe the politics that have been brought up in this case, and a little bit more about Luigi Mangione and some of the things he's receiving while behind bars from people, especially women who are out there wanting to seek his attention. So stay with us. We'll be back with more on this case. Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're with us for our live stream here. We're talking about the Luigi Mangione case. He's charged with 11 counts, accused of gunning down the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, back in Midtown Manhattan as he was on his way to a convention, shot really in the back from behind several times, leading to his death. Attorney General Pam Bondi's decision on the death penalty. Let's talk about that a little bit, Greg. She says she's directing prosecutors to seek it as part of, quote, President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again. She goes on to say the murder of Brian Thompson, an innocent man and father of 2 young children, was a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. She is not mincing words at all.
She's not, and on literally her first day in office, she completely did a reversal on the Biden administration's stance on federal capital cases and Merrick Garland's. She lifted the stay that had been put in place against capital prosecutions, and then she also issued a mandate that they are going to aggressively review cases under the Biden tenure to see if they would qualify for the death penalty. They being the U.S. attorneys, are instructed to try to find cases that would be eligible for that degree of punishment. So we have completely, the pendulum has not swung, it has catapulted to the other end of the spectrum, where you are going to see a plethora of federal death cases, which has been rare during the history of the federal death penalty.
And the spotlight sure is on this one, this new one. And this goes to Luigi Mangione's attorney's statement saying Luigi is caught in a high-stakes game of tug-of-war between state and federal prosecutors, except the trophy here is a young man's life, also saying this decision to go for death in this case is, quote, barbaric and political.
You know, being a defense lawyer, I still kind of scratch my head sometime and kind of struggle with the irony when you're defending somebody and they're fighting for their life in a death penalty case, and the allegations are they took a human life in cold blood, and in this case, in a premeditated, planned fashion, shooting somebody in the back after significant planning preparation, which by the way is an aggravating factor under the federal death penalty, and then you criticize the prosecutors for seeking the death penalty. And it's almost going to be interesting to see whether the federal prosecutors and state prosecutors bite on this tactic to kind of deify Luigi as a vigilante, to demonize the death penalty, and take the spotlight away from this assassination as Attorney General Bondi characterized it.
Yes, and let's dive more, into why this case is a rarity, why the death penalty, and you touched on this earlier, why it's really been dramatically decreased in its use in the U.S. over really the past 25 years.
Well, for example, let's look at typically scenarios where the jurisdiction of the federal government would justify a death penalty case. Murder, which we have here,
Sure.
genocide, treason, espionage, terrorism resulting in death. And, in the United States, we do not have a lot of genocide, treason, espionage, and terrorism that results in death. So now what I think you're going to see is when it's a case of international terrorism or espionage, the death penalty is going to be the norm. That's not going to be something they're going to struggle with. And you're going to see a significant number of murder cases that are now go federal. And I will tell you the interesting dynamic, practicing a lot in federal court, typically they're not geared for a death penalty case.
They don't like them.
You have to have a death qualified jury. You have to have a bifurcated trial. You have to have special jury instructions.
And we've talked to many jury members before who've said, that's something I struggle with greatly. It's one thing to think about it, it's another to admit how you feel.
Having tried about 8, 9 death penalty cases, it is different from the moment that you walk in the courtroom, the moment that you look at that jury and you start asking them questions to see if they can be death qualified. Can you follow the law if following the law in this case means voting to take somebody's life? And it's a very real, raw discussion because it really is the ultimate punishment, the ultimate case, and the ultimate judgment a citizen can impose on another human being. So it's going to be interesting how federal courts gear up for just the logistics and mechanism of death penalty prosecution. And I will also say this, I would venture to say that not a lot of U.S. attorneys that I know, a lot of federal prosecutors, have tried death penalty cases.
It's that rare.
It's that rare. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. But Attorney General Bondi has made no bones about it. But they're not pumping the brakes. They've got their foot on the gas, and I think you're going to see an explosion in federal death cases.
And that's a follow-up for sure to see the ripple effect from this decision and what's going to happen from here on out. Let's go back to this case. We mentioned it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. You have those bullets, the engraved bullet casings that we talked about. You have the backpack. You have the water bottle. You have notes that talk about mindset, motivation. And now Luigi Mangione's attorney says, I want to get my hands on that laptop. What is she hoping to find? Is there something in there she's hoping to say, hey, he didn't do this? Would there be any evidence on what is she looking
You never
for?
know. The way social media has changed the legal landscape, one of the first things, whether you're a defense lawyer or a prosecutor, is you want to look at all social media. You want to look at text, emails. You want to look at someone's search history. So you want their tablets. You want their smartphones. You want their computer. So that's being a very savvy, a smart lawyer. But, interestingly, and I was interviewed by the American Bar Association when this case first broke, on the pretrial publicity. But it's interesting when you look at, can there be a fair trial, whether it's a state jury or a federal jury venire in the Eastern District of New York or state court in New York. Instead of trying to kind of tamp down the pretrial publicity, the lawyers have taken an opposite tack. You have people wearing green in support of Luigi. You have the lawyers attacking. I mean, their statements are acrimonious and filled with a lot of vitriol and acrimony as it relates to health care.
People have definite opinions. I mean, if you were to do a poll, there would be really polarizing factors on whether you're for
think about
Luigi
this.
or against Luigi.
Well, how could you be for or against somebody that it would be
That
one
killed
thing to
someone,
file
allegedly.
a class action lawsuit and say that healthcare claims are being precipitously or wrongfully denied, as opposed to shooting a CEO in the back after you've stalked them when they're walking down the
But
streets
people
of
are
New York
weighing
City.
in. You've seen their comments.
It's a different day, and that's what makes jury selection such an adventure now, because it's hard when we see these rapidly changing social mores and folkways, where the moral compass of a prospective jury denier is, and to think that we're sitting here when you have a premeditated assassination of a major CEO, and the defense may just be that healthcare is bad, is a remarkable
And what do you
swing
do
in
with
opinion. What you do with that, if you're a prosecutor, you immediately file a motion for a gag order. You file a motion to eliminate any reference to jury nullification, and you tell them to stick to the facts of the case and the law that's applicable. But I think you're going to see that sooner rather than later, as this Pam Bondi press conference about filing the death notice has kind of exploded and propelled this case back to the front of the headlines again.
All right, stay with us, everyone. We're going to be back. You touched on the publicity surrounding Luigi Mangione. What is it about him that has captured the public's attention? He is quite a character. We'll be back with more on that. Stay with us. All right, everyone, thank you again for being with us on our live stream today. We want to remind you we're talking more on the air coming up at 5:30 about this case. We're going to kind of glean what we've learned in this discussion, highlight it for you, let you know where this case stands. But Luigi Mangione has pleaded not guilty to the 11 counts against him in the murder, what some are calling the assassination, of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And we're talking about all the publicity surrounding Luigi Mangione. People, I think, just like saying his name. He started getting attention really from day one. The latest, someone sent him socks containing heart-shaped notes. I don't know what was written on the notes, but what stands out is that's against a court order. Explain that.
Well, you're not allowed to send things to state or federal facilities. There's very strict orders on contraband, et cetera. But it really amazes me, and it's almost like Luigi Mangione is a master at manipulating the media, because you have the etchings, delay, depose, deny on the bullet casings. Then you have the factor that he escaped, and so he wasn't arrested until they found him in Altoona, Pennsylvania,
At a McDonald's.
At a McDonald's. Interestingly, and one of the pieces of evidence that put him on law enforcement radar was a video clip from a Starbucks that I had been to a week before in New York, in that area near Times Square.
Wow.
But it's almost like he's trying to manufacture the persona and the defense of being a vigilante. And it's interesting because is he winning in the court of public opinion? Surprisingly, yes. But will that defense be permitted in a court of law? Absolutely not. Unless you have some stealth jurors that say, I'm not going to fall for jury nullification, which means I'm going to make a decision regardless what the law says because I think it's the right thing, not the legal thing to do. I think it's going to blow up. And here's what's also interesting. The case in state court, and these prosecutors now are going to start jockeying for position on who gets to go first. But state court, cameras are allowed in the courtroom. It's a theater production. It's a spectacle. Federal court, much different.
Yeah.
You have sketch artists. You have people that talk about what they witnessed in court. But I think that publicity is going to be tamped down by some of the actions that you're going to see by the prosecutors. And also just because of the dynamic that federal court does not lend itself to all the media frenzy and the hoopla.
Right. Although I'm sure there will be people outside the courthouse wearing green. He has a cult following with some supporters wearing green, the color of the Luigi character from the Mario Brothers video game franchise, as a symbol of solidarity. So not to take away the extreme seriousness of this case, you have people who are saying, hey, This guy represents so many people who've had terrible, terrible dealings with the healthcare industry, and that's what's speaking to a lot of people, right or wrong.
Well, and it's hard for me to extrapolate and link the two because I think that's what
Certainly.
Luigi wanted to do. But again, the right avenue or venue to redress healthcare misfeasance, malfeasance is in the courtroom,
Right.
but in civil court, not to assassinate the CEO of United Healthcare. You could do a sit-in, you could do a protest, you could do a strike. But what is amazing to me is that the conduct, the stalking, the planning, the premeditation, this wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't something that was just a no-one killing. This clearly, the indicia and the evidence that we've seen so far show a premeditated act. And to kind of validate that by saying it's justified because of the atrocities of healthcare is a significant disconnect that I do not think the judges in either of these cases is going to let get much traction.
There's no way it could it?
No.
All right, there you go. Let's talk more about the vigilante aspect, as we've been talking about, as you just said, vigilante, premeditated. How does that notion, as we start to sum things up, figure into the defense and the prosecution strategies? What would you do, in other words?
If you are the prosecutors, you are going to clamp down pre-trial, file motion after motion for a gag order, a motion that would prohibit the defense from playing to the jury's emotion on the concept of vigilantism for a jury nullification, and you're going to hit that sooner rather than later. If you're the defense, you're going to try to obfuscate everything. You're going to try to misdirect the focus of the jury on what you want to do is take the jury away from December 4th, when the CEO, Brian Thompson, was walking down a sidewalk in New York near Times Square. You want to go anywhere but there. You want to talk about healthcare. You want to talk about atrocities. You want to talk about the denial of claims, people that were denied help for their cancer.
But not about this dad.
Yeah. So you want to take the focus away from December 4th, and if you're the defense, it's going to be hard to have a legal fair fight toe to toe once you're focused on the events of that day, the planning, the premeditation. And I think with the federal prosecutors and state prosecutors, they're going to take you through Luigi's conduct at leading up to December 4th. You're going to see the stalking. You're going to see how he followed Brian Thompson, how he knew his whereabouts, how he had planned his getaway. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. But what I'm seeing from media reports, if you're the defense in a capital case, you better come up with a better defense other than healthcare is bad.
All right. And, we haven't talked a lot about Brian Thompson, and we really should, because this was a father, had children, had risen in the ranks of the healthcare industry, and was simply walking down the sidewalk, going to a conference to talk more about what he did for a living.
Whether you agree or disagree with Brian
Correct.
Thompson's business practices, the premeditated killing of Mr. Thompson, a father, an individual, was sad.
So you have people who are sharing, like we have been talking about, their anger against the healthcare industry, how they may or may not feel about CEOs in the healthcare industry, or just obsessing over this guy, this Luigi, who somehow has captured everybody's attention. Whether it's the eyebrows, it's that smile that he had plastered on his face, whatever it is that is reaching people, it's doing just that.
Well, and the other thing, when you have somebody that's an atypical defendant committing an atypical crime, you have somebody highly educated, someone that came from a good family, somebody that planned think about this. When is the last time, other than an episode of a Netflix movie, where you see a case where someone had etched words in the bullet casings before they were going to assassinate a CEO. So he's done a masterful job of manipulating the media. And Lori, please don't take this personally, but the media loves to be manipulated. They want someone to generate as much attention as they can, and they like this frenzy. They like somebody because vigilantes are few and far between.
I don't know who this they is you're talking about. No,
Well,
I see your point. I see your point, and
Sure.
we're going to talk more. We're going to wrap this up, talk about what's going to happen next in this case, what we think will happen next, and the fallout from it. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back. We're talking about the directive by the Attorney General Pamela Bondi to enact the death penalty case against Luigi Mangione. So let's talk about what happens next.
Well, in talking about this defense and the vigilantism and the jury nullification that's being floated by the defense team, where it could possibly come into play, Lori, is if he's convicted at the sentencing phase, because much like state court, the defense will be entitled to put on mitigating factors. One factor that would be applicable to Luigi is he has no criminal record. And then there's typically a catch-all. So then you can take a deep dive into his thought process, attempt to put his conduct into a context on why he did what he did, talk about loved ones or family members that were denied health care coverage.
What about his own situation? If they can't talk about health care, as a whole on that wider issue, can they bring up his scoliosis and his surgeries and all the things that his family said deteriorated over the years?
And I think what's going to be interesting, it should not come in the case in chief. If he's convicted, I think the judge will let it come in an attempt to save his life. So that's where I think you're going to hear the story of why Luigi did what he did, how he did it, and then his personal health care issues and opinions become relevant.
Do you think he'll avoid the death penalty, having said all that?
You never know. I thought the Parkland shooting case, which I covered on Court TV, I thought that was a clear case where someone was going to get a sentence of death, and they did not. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds.
All right, we'll talk more at 5:30.
Let's do.
All right, thanks for being with us.